Well, good morning, Chris Slatoff. How you doing?
Doing really well.
Good. You're there in LA,
Correct? Yes.
in your home, and I'm here in Wisconsin. And in this wonderful opportunity, this Zoom thing allows us to have a great chance to talk with one another, and it's fun to see you.
Some of my greatest conversations in my whole life is with you.
Thanks. Well, I have to say the same thing. Chris, I want to explain to people what this is about. Um, I've been encouraged that I've got so many amazing friends in theology and the arts and architecture and science and all the people that I've met all through my career. And I've been encouraged to have conversations with them in a format that allows me to share them with others. So you're actually the very first one I'm doing, and I'm excited about doing this, but I want to tell you why you're the first one. I was trying to think about a sort of a title or an umbrella under which these things could be put. And a phrase that you initiated came to mind, and I think it's a great one. And so what I'm going to try to do is put these under the banner of Lousy Gods, which is kind of an in-your-face title. But I want people to know where that comes from. You told me the story, so please let everybody know where that phrase comes from.
Well, it's so funny because as an artist, people always want to engage in conversations about thinking that my faith is not conducive to creating art, which is which is ridiculous. Because what I tell people, then I was trying to separate. Okay, this is my secular art, and this is my religious art. And then the borders are so fuzzy, and then I realized, well, wait a minute, all art is religious art. Just some people have lousy gods, because it's the aim of art is transcendence, is to be beyond just the day-to-day. It's the opposite of the mundane.
Yeah.
And in that, it's going to be. And so you see some art, and you go, that's enough to wake you up in the morning to go to work. I roll out of the bed and sculpt. I've never been bored a day in my life unless I had to do something that I didn't want to.
What I love about that idea of lousy gods is it doesn't just apply to art. It certainly applies to theology. I mean, there are all sorts of idols or things that we tend to worship that aren't central. So theologically, it's a great reference. But then I was thinking, if I'm talking to a scientist, I think there are lousy gods in their field. Who are the lousy gods that people worship in the field of science or chemistry or what have you? So anyway, I'm giving this a try, and these conversations are going to be made available in a way that people can just tune in if they want to, and we'll see what happens. I didn't really give you a decent introduction, Chris, because not everybody will know who you are automatically. And I'm going to sorry to burst that bubble.
You said that with a straight face, Yeah.
Well, I just want people to know your stature as a sculptor. Chris, you've done probably, I don't know if I could say a number of the really great prominent bronze sculptures in Los Angeles and other places in recent years. Just remarkable work. I like to think of you as the sculptor laureate of LA.
Figurative sculptor laureate, let's say. Thank you. I don't know what to say, but our friendship began when I told you I always consider my sculptures sermons in bronze. And you go, wait a minute. Okay. And that was, was the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah, people are aware. I was on my way to my preaching class at Fuller Seminary, and I heard you give a talk just beforehand, and you used that phrase and it said, "preaching in bronze," and so we grabbed chairs from our classroom. We put them around your sculpture, the Crucifixion of Jesus, which was in the middle of the campus at Fuller, and I invited you, and you came immediately without any further prompting. And we sat down and had an hour or two conversation about what does it mean to preach and what does it mean to preach in bronze. So it was a great start.
Well, I always go back to the Monty Python comedy sketch of I'm here for an argument. You know, I am. I'm always there for an argument. And this was remarkably civil, and it was exciting, and it had its way of changing my life. So really wonderful. You've always given me a platform for my ideas.
Well, you've got great ideas. One of the things that I love about our conversations is that they're always so darn funny. You have a great sense of humor, and you're always slipping in these. What, for example, one of your lines that I've heard you say a number of times. By the way, you also say, you have to forgive me, I repeat myself. but one of your lines is, you'll have to excuse my false humility. It's the only humility I have.
Yeah, that's all I got, you know.
But there are 1,000 of them, and maybe some will creep in our conversation. So Chris, how in the world did you get started as a sculptor? I know your dad was an artist, and how did that all start?
I got a nice fish in the background. Whoop, it's all backwards. That my father painted back about the year I was born.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, he was very disappointed in the kind of art that I do. But as I've told you, and as one of my taglines is, everybody's choice of a profession is a poke in the eye to their dad. You know, whether you doing what they do or the opposite of what they do, there's always a touch of getting even in it. So I've never been able to draw very well, and I obviously don't paint. The dirty little secrets about sculptors is we're usually colorblind. So I was I loved it. There was an article on me years ago called From Play-Doh to Pietà, because I was the Play-Doh king. I literally, I know what Play-Doh looks like after, 60 years, because I have my aunt saved the little sculptures that I did back when I was, 5 or 6. And I just always did it. Just wind me up when I sculpt.
They must be worth a million.
Well, actually, I offended them because I thought they were just showing them to me. No, they're trying to give them back to me. You know, here, take your crap. You know, it was. It just always when you want to express something, it just is so much easier for me to do it with these sculpture.
I'd like to share with people something that I observed whenever I'm with you. You're usually sitting there with a little piece of clay, just a little hunk of it, and you're doing a small version, maybe this big, of the person that's sitting across the room that's not talking, making little busts of them, or something that you're working on, and you're always fiddling with stuff. And I like to doodle on paper, and I'm not any good at it, but it occupies me when I'm bored. And for you, it's just all three-dimensional.
As I say, if I have a gift, it's in my hands, not in my eyes. I could actually sculpt better with my eyes closed than I can draw.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
The other thing is people go, oh well, you know symmetry, because so much of traditional beauty is all tied up in symmetry. But I have trouble seeing symmetry in it, but I can feel it. It's like when I'm doing a portrait head. You're working on it, and it's not right, but everyone knows what a face feels like. So you grab it and you go, there it is. Okay, all right. That cheekbone's a little low, things like that. Yeah, it's just.
That's fascinating. Yeah. It's really fun watching you work. I've had the opportunity to do that any number of times, because I would, especially when I was living in Pasadena, but even since that time, I would come over to your studio, and your studio looks just like anybody would imagine the sculptor's studio to look like. There's crap everywhere, and there are finished and unfinished pieces of sculpture of every size. You've got little things, you've got things that are as big as a barn door, and they're all over the place, and you're always working on. So, and you can see the infrastructure, the wires and things that create over which you sculpt. to keep them together. Chris, one of the things that is just really fascinating about what you do is the process. And I think, I know I'm fascinated by it, and you've described it to me in the past, but it's complicated enough. I actually kind of forget the details. Can you explain how you go from, a concept in your head to a sculptor that's 12 feet, let's say a sculpture of a person that turns out to be 12 feet high?
First of all, you work to your strong suits. And for me, ideas are always the strong suit. When I'm approached about doing a sculpture, I'll show up with like, here's 5 or 6 little models of ideas, because you just keep coming. They used to call it brain fever when I was a kid, because you would just it's something out of Dostoevsky, where the ideas are coming so thick and fast that you're trying to sculpt as fast as you can all of these different ideas. Mm-hmm. I joked about my wife coming in the morning, and instead of cigarettes and beer bottles thrown everywhere, there's dozens of books open and half-written notes and little clay sculptures all around, and that will be one of those sessions where you're because I'm fascinated with the concept of the big idea.
Yeah.
The big idea that something is more than it's like when I do art that's traditionally when I do church art, all the art is religious, but when it's I can't do the tradition. I cannot do like the icon. I can't do the kind of artwork where you have what it is. It's like the iconography where it feels like Clue. Oh, I got it. Oh, he's carrying keys. He's Peter. It's Colonel Mustard in the pantry with a wrench. It doesn't all add up. And
Chris, when let's say once the client who hires you to do a sculpture, once they settle on, let's say you come in with 6 little things, and they say, I like that concept. Make that for me. Make that 12 feet.
Right. So first of all, I think at about 8 inches. So I'll do a larger one to get exactly kind of where we're going. But also then I get a live model to make sure a body can do that, because sometimes you've got something out there mm-hmm. that, no, bodies don't do that. So from there, I will, work out engineer a system where it'll hold up the clay. Because one of my proofs of God is the fact that you try putting 200 pounds on those tiny little ankles, of humanity. And when you're putting 200 pounds of dead weight clay on an armature, it will sag. So what I do is build up an enormous engineering structure of pipes and aluminum wire and all of that onto which to put the clay. Yeah. And in fact, one of those times it worked to my benefit, because I had, I did a crucifix and I had Jesus up there, like this. And as heroic as I made him, the weight just started to crumple it down. Mm-hmm. Better. So I lay the clay on and just work from it. And I needed a deadline because I'll work on it forever. I'll turn any one job into a career. So then it goes to the foundry. Which,
before you rush past that crucifix, I just want to make an observation. I came to the studio one time while you were working on that, and you said that to me. You said, every morning when I come in, I've got to take this sort of massive shoulder structure, because it was about an 8 or 9 foot tall Jesus figure.
Yeah, about 7.
Yeah. It was going to be. In fact, it is now. It's finished, and it's hanging in the USC chapel. It's this magnificent piece. But at the time you're working on it, and you showed it to me, and it's all in clay, and you said every morning you have to come back and push Jesus back up onto the cross because of the weight of it. And what strikes me about that, and this is so fascinating, Chris, what strikes me about that is when you read up on, you know, what were these Romans doing with all this crucifixion stuff, they did it because it was an agonizing death, because when you're up there, just like the clay did, your whole weight leans forward and you suffocate because you can't get a breath. And that's why they would nail your feet, because you can't put your weight on your feet long enough to stand up and get a breath, but it's too painful. So there was a great example of that right in your sculpture.
It was a frightening thing because, you know, I am Joe Protestant. You know, I was raised Presbyterian, which is, it's not the greatest field to produce sculptors in. And so when I watched, I would lay the sculpture down and sculpt on it more. And then I had a whole group of people help me pick it up. And it was the event. I mean, you couldn't, there was the quality, as I wrote in an essay about it, was that every day I crucified Christ.
Yeah. Almost sounds
every day I got up, I went into the studio and crucified Christ.
Yeah.
And it really got a little bit eerie, putting the crown of thorns on him. Because to me, that's a very, very potent symbol, and something that I feel that Northern Renaissance much more concentrated on than the Italian Renaissance, because they live in more trees and plants and bushes, forests.
Hey, Chris, I got you off the track of what I had first asked. Was
that never happens.
Right. So you finish. I mean, it takes a long time to finish a massive sculpture, and you do it all in clay on top of this armature, and then you go to the forgery.
The foundry, correct.
Right.
And I consider myself a foundry rat, and this is one of the great things. I mean, you watched us pour bronze, and when we were pouring the bronze in my old studio, I mean, that was as caveman as it got, because the technology really hasn't changed in its essence since the ancient Greeks. I like to say that you could grab an ancient Greek foundryman, say, okay, instead of bellows, we got something that's going to blow the air onto the fire, other than that, suit up and come on, we're going to pour some bronze,
So how do you go from the clay to, there's several steps before you're starting to pour bronze in a mold.
Oh yeah, but this is one of the most difficult things to explain to people, because I have incredible trouble with left and right. And in the process of casting bronze, you go from a positive to a negative constantly, because you have the positive of the clay. And in the end, what I spent so long on is just will be torn up and reused, because you cover that in a mold, mold rubber, and then on top of that, a plaster jacket. You open that up, clear out, there's incredible amounts of spiritual metaphors in this, but you clear out the clay out of that mold, and then your sculpture exists as the magic void, as nothing. The body's gone.
Wow, that's amazing.
Into that, you pour wax, which of course I'd pull out the verse from Psalms, which talks about crucifixion and says, "My heart is like wax and melts." Because the one thing the wax does is it goes away, it melts. So we put a thin crust of wax. So now your sculpture is back. It exists as this about quarter-inch of wax.
So let me just see if I have this right. So you started with this clay figure that you spent unbelievable hours perfecting in the sculpting process, no matter how big it is. And then you make the mold, and then you open it up, take all of the clay away. So the sculpture you had made is gone now.
Right.
You put it back together, you pour some wax in, and now it's there again, only in this very flimsy material.
It's like a giant chocolate Easter bunny.
Okay. So how do you go from there to get it into bronze?
All right, so exactly the same way that all of your faucets and metal fixtures are in your house, it's the same way. You hack that, well, first of all, you remember the wax is going to go away. So you put wax rods, which is like the plumbing, into a wax cup. Okay, so that's packed in a material that can withstand heat. We contemporary use a slurry material, which is a colloidal silica. But when I first started out, we were using exactly what the Greeks used, which was a clay base with various organic compounds in it that burned out for a week.
Mm.
So now you have totally encrusted your chocolate Easter bunny in this about a half inch of ceramic.
And that becomes
And
the second mold, right?
and then that's the second mold. Then that is when that's put into the furnace. It's the wax melts away.
Mm-hmm.
Those wax rods become channels, and the wax cup becomes a hollow into which you can pour the bronze.
So
Now,
yeah, so like if you were sculpting a human figure, these channels would be like you would put like a horn or a channel or a spike, and with a cup on the top, and then later when the wax all goes away, that's a tube now that feeds wax into the. Okay.
and lets the air out.
Yeah.
So then comes the magic, because once again, your sculpture is the magic void. It's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So you heat up those molds, and then you start the furnace, and you melt those big ingots of bronze, and then you have this crucible full of just melt. It looks like it's incredible. It's this beautiful molten metal,
Mm-hmm.
and you take a scooper and you drag the slag off the top and throw that away. I mean, just biblical references everywhere.
Yeah.
Because all the impurities in that incredible fire rise to the surface like scum, and you just scrape that off, and then you just have this pure metal.
By the way, you're not doing this in t-shirts and shorts, are you?
Oh no, moon suits. But you've seen us.
Yeah.
We wouldn't do this today. You've seen us use wool sweaters and leather shoes. I mean, when I was doing it myself, I remember going and taking my gloves off and then grabbing the shield, the visor, and I burned my hand on the visor in front of my face.
Ooh.
It's hot.
Yeah.
And so then then to watch the pour, just that trickle of, it's volcano, just that trickle of beautiful bronze into this void.
Now, the one other thing that really fascinated me, because you make some really big sculptures, and I can see how that would work in a little maquette, 8, 10, 12, 16 inches high. It's all kind of manageable. But when you do big pours, big figures, you actually have to hack the whole thing apart, don't you?
This is my body broken for you. I mean, it really constantly you're getting these, especially when you're casting Christ. And there is that element of the beginning is the body's made of clay. I mean, I work with the dust of the earth.
Yeah.
And then you're casting it into bronze, the metal of judgment. I mean, just this beautiful, you can drop it in the ocean for a couple thousand years and still pull it out. I mean, this incredible material. And but it has to be cast in sections.
Yeah.
Then you have to weld it together. And now this is my biggest problem with it, because it's a 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
All right. And so they'll go as we're doing it. The welder's going to me, okay, he puts the arm on and go, oh, is that right? And then in 1 second, they want me to tell them, I spent a month deciding whether it was this, moving it around by millimeters. And they went, how's that? So there are times that we do it, we weld it up, and I have to go, no. And, they have to cut the arm and move it like that.
Oh my. And
And weld it up.
how do you get the weld spots because in the finished product, it would be impossible to tell where the seams were. How do you pull that off?
It is, well, that's one of the reasons we use silica bronze, because it welds up so well. And so, yeah, because if you look at old bronzes, you'll see they didn't weld, they soldered. So they used a softer metal to join the two. So there's usually a little line. But here we're actually melting the metal together because we're using the exact alloy. But then, now here's where you need somebody good. And frequently people say, well, you're the artist, you should do it yourself. I don't know. These guys, to go in there with a power tool and be able to copy the texture that I've laid out.
Oh.
Is incredible. I mean, this is why you pick your foundry carefully. These people are good.
Yeah.
The guy who welds up my sculpture and stuff. I've known him for it was about 2001 that I started casting with him. So yeah, they get to know you.
Well, in the end, it's all spectacular, and you can't see any seams, and there are these magnificent pieces. Chris, you've made some really epic pieces, and I think most of them are in the Los Angeles area, various colleges, institutions, universities, churches, and things like that. Some of them are more on the secular side, some are more on the religious side, sort of intentionally religious. Just describe a couple of your most epic pieces.
Well, of course, when you go epic, you've got to go with USC. Okay, once again, these are the things that I love, is that I work on more than one project at once, and they reflect each other. So two of my most prominent pieces were done at the same time. One was the president of USC said that over 50% of the student body is female, yet the symbol for USC, University of Southern California, is Tommy Trojan, a male, and it is kind of a militaristic. It's not the image that he felt appropriate for. So Hecuba was the queen of the Trojans. So I had to find a way to do her without it being like she's a cheerleader. What I really wanted to do was to have her. There's a wonderful a vessel from the old times where she is dressing Hector. So I thought this is perfect because this is what this university does. It gives you your armor. That diploma is helping you dress in what is going to protect you for the rest of your life. But at the same time, I was doing a memorial to the soldiers who were lost, who were killed in action in the current war on terror. And they played off against each other because they were able to, I got a sense of history and a sense of the Iliad and the Aeneid and all of that in doing, from Hecuba to add to the soldier. And then when I did the Hecuba, I was able to add the real sense of personal loss and the tragedies that were, were part of those. Okay. Yeah. But once again, off subject, the 20-foot Hecuba and the 9-foot Soldiers Memorial in Pasadena. And my favorite uh, non my favorite piece that is not with a religious subject matter is The Illustrated Man, which I did when I was working with Ray Bradbury.
In fact, I
Uh,
was hoping you'd mention that because you got a small version of it. In what kind of um, what material is that in?
that is actually, I had to buy that. That was, I gave that to Ray. When we first started working, when we first did it, I gave him this copy.
Yeah.
And I signed it, a bunch of us signed it, hey, Ray, and all of that. And his family put it on for sale after his death.
Oh, really?
And I bought it. What are you going to do?
What's the size of that one behind you? We can see it just behind you there.
Oh, it's about 36 inches.
And Chris, would you please get up and turn it around and show people why it's called The Illustrated Man? And as you do this, I'm going to just say, I've seen the original, and the original is about an 8-foot figure, and it's just massive. And the entire back is made up of these incredible images. I don't know, what do you call them? Each one is a little vignette of some kind. And somewhere in there, there's a picture of Ray Bradbury. I think I can see it even right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. But man, I wish everybody would get a chance to go and see this. It's just simply stunning. And I don't know if you consider it so, but I consider it really your masterpiece because it is so involved and so beautiful and so it's elegant. It's just so deeply expressive of so many things. And one of the things I love is that the young 12 or 13-year-old boy in his arms is actually is your son Jamie.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Magnificent.
But you had an influence on it as well, in the fact that you made it possible for me to go to Orvieto, Italy, and a great deal of the references on the back come from the facade of Orvieto Cathedral.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And people can see photographs of it on my website, which is just my name, ChristopherSlatoff.com.
Yeah, I'll try to put your website on the bottom of the screen here so that people can see it. I'm sure after hearing us chat for a bit that they're going to want to go to your website and see this stuff. They're just magnificent. Chris, we could talk about every one of your sculptures, and each one has at least one great story behind it. But let's talk about the one you did for me and us when I was head of the seminary down in South Carolina. This was Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary, and it had merged with Lenoir-Rhyne University in North Carolina. And I discovered when walking around the campus of Lenoir-Rhyne University, they had all of these sculptures. I mean, huge sculptures. There was a 15-foot high sculpture of Martin Luther, and there were sculptures of band instruments and just of athletic heroes all over the campus. And I inquired, where are all these sculptures coming from? And the athletic director, he said, well, Irwin Belk, who was the 90-year-old heir to the Belk department store fortune, he just loves giving sculptures and, like $100,000 at a crack. And so you and I went to see Irwin Belk, and we had to sit down and look at his baby book. Remember how he made us look at all of the different sculptures that he had supported all throughout the Southeast, all as a part of getting in on his good graces enough that he would fund the seminary's Martin Luther statue. And then it was all turned over to you. And tell us, you came up with the most remarkable rendering of Luther. I think people would be fascinated to know how that came to mind.
Well, first of all, I did Luther as an artist. One of the most delightful things was to find that he was very close friends with the painter Lucas Cranach. And I sort of saw Cranach and Luther as you and me. And it gave me a real something to grab onto. But also, I always said about this is that if you ask your go into Lutheran society and ask people to name any one of the theses that he nailed on the doors, they can't come up with one. You ask any one of them to sing A Mighty Fortress, and you've got them. There's not one of them that cannot do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so where is the real power, the long power that that Martin Luther was able to influence people? Yes, in the beginning it was the controversy there, but to this very minute, people are refreshed and people are given spiritual growth through his music, what he wrote.
Yeah, the opponents at the time said he ruined more souls with his hymns than he ever did with his theology.
And hey, that's my world.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I really wish we originally were trying to get him to include Katie Von Bora, and she was holding a baby because I designed it out, and he was in his full dress robes, which I've seen you in, and he's singing to his child, which is us, children of the Reformation.
He's playing his lute.
He's playing his lute.
Yeah.
And
I love your comment when people ask about that. You say, well, he's got a little Jimi Hendrix going on there.
Just a little bit, And what I really wanted to do, and what we were on our way to doing, was to have him jamming with Martin Luther King. Because imagine because every time I said I did a Martin Luther, people thought I did a Martin Luther King. But we did a model of that where he was in the same robes, clapping.
Hold on one second.
All right. So this was the idea of Martin Luther and Martin Luther King were so much closer than people will ever. Oh, okay. Yeah. All right.
I stole this from you. Did you know I had it?
No.
You wondered where it went.
Oh, well, at least now I know where it is. But to have them across time.
And we were talking about this. We never got a chance to do this, but Chris obviously did this little maquette of it. And we were talking about it as having two sculptures on the seminary campus of the two preachers of freedom.
Yes.
And people may not know this. I think I've told you, Chris, that Luther's name was originally Luder, not Th, but he changed it to Th because eleutheria is freedom in Greek, and he wanted to have that Luth in there so that his name bore the marks of Christian freedom. So the two preachers of freedom would have been magnificent.
And of course, Martin Luther King was born Michael King.
That's right.
And his father was in Germany and was so impressed by Martin Luther, and people don't connect these theology points. He was so impressed with Martin Luther. He changed his own name, and he changed his young son's name as well.
That's right.
So here are people remaking themselves in God, in freedom. And I wanted to really show the two of them singing together, sing to the Lord a new song.
Well, we didn't get a chance to do the Martin Luther King statue. Neither did we get a chance to add Katie. You had Martin and Katie, Martin singing. Katie had the purse strings because she was the householder and the keeper of the money. But there was one part of the process that I found really humorous. So you were working on this idea for Luther, full size. Well, it's like about an 8-foot statue. It's really quite massive. And you said he needs to have a beer stein at his feet because obviously he drank beer and that was an important part of the story. And you, in the end, you made a beer stein that's in that scale. It's like almost 2 feet tall. And then you said to me one day, now, should we have the beer stein with one of those tops on it, or should we just have it open? And I thought, well, let's see, it's going to be sitting next to Martin Luther on the ground, and it'll be a seminary full of strange people, and you know what they might do on Friday night? We better put a top on it.
Oh, but also, the Stein would have gone better if we had Katie there, because she brewed the beer
That's right.
that that kept his health going.
That's right. That's right.
And also, then I wanted to add something that added to the whole story. So I wanted to, those beer steins are so beautiful with their sculpting on them. I wanted to tell a story with that, and I thought that Martin Luther really saw God, Jesus as he was, saw the divinity in Christ. It was like he witnessed the transfiguration.
Yeah.
So we put the transfiguration on the stein.
Fine.
But of course, the joke that goes with that is drink this beer and see God. Yes.
Mhm.
So
You also had another illusion that you told me about. Um, Jesus meets his two friends, and so it was like three buddies on the Stein. And in reference to that specific sculpture, the three buddies were you and me and our friend from Lenore Rhine who helped us get the money. And it was three friends working together.
absolutely. Oh,
Yeah,
it's all based on friendship. It's
yeah,
like somebody once said, how do you, how does Chris get these commissions? And it was, he knows a lot of people. It's friendship. It's,
yeah.
you know,
Chris,
uh,
we could go on and on about so many of your sculptures. I just want to talk about one more. Um,
yes.
and I think that'll be kind of a nice wrap up to our conversation. Before I talk about one more, I did want to cycle back to the immense uh, crucifixion that hangs at the USC Chapel. It's such a stunning piece. But during the process, I remember the day that I walked into your studio and you're on the phone with somebody in the back of the studio, and you saw me walk in, and you're just saying, okay, just a minute, I'm on the phone. And as I'm waiting, I'm looking around and I'm messing with things, and I try to mess you up a little bit and tweak some things that you have to fix later. But I looked over. It was a time when you were working on that crucifixion, and Jesus was not hanging up high; he was down low where you could work on him. I walked by and I looked, and right there on his right butt cheek, you had scratched a phone number. It was like somebody said, "Hey, take this number down." You must have grabbed a nail or something. You scratched the phone number in Jesus' butt cheek just to keep it. I don't think that wound up in the final product, though, did
No, we put the loincloth on top of that. But I never have a pencil on me, or a pen, but I always have a stylus and I always have clay.
it? Yeah.
So I have taken down more notes just scratching on the clay. But, makes you feel, that's very biblical as well. It makes you feel like you're a scribe in
Yeah.
ancient Egypt.
Well, let's talk about one more, and then I'll let you go. It's the one that you and I affectionately know as Bob and Dave.
Ah, yes.
Tell us about that.
All right. So this happened, right after 9/11. I sculpted this, and it was Jesus being nailed to the cross as part of the Stations of the Cross that I was doing life size. We only got 3 in before the commission dissolved, but it ended up on the campus of Fuller, which is remarkable because it is so not Presbyterian, and it's the most brutal sculpture I ever did, and all of that. And so there it was, Jesus being nailed to the cross. But I had my two buddies who posed for it. So, I can go by the name. It officially is station number 9. I think it's 9. Jesus, dyslexic. Numbers mean nothing to me. Jesus being nailed to the cross, or I can call it Bob and Dave, because those are my two buddies, Bob and Dave. And they posed for that, and it was the whole idea of this sculpture is it's very difficult to do Jesus, because technically he's everything. You can't limit him down. So the way you portray Jesus is in the way people react to him around him. So in all of these sculptures, you will find I've sort of cut away all my different reactions to Christ personally. and given them their own figure. So if I'd been able to do the entire series, it would have been love, adoration, anger, um, just every possible reaction you can have to Christ, and that was the idea of it. But
And one of the things I like about the Bob and Dave story is that you actually sort of captured the personality of each of the persons individually in the role that they're playing in the sculpture.
yes, well, Dave is the one who's grabbing the arm of Christ, and he is Dave is just a type A personality. And the whole thing I was trying to get across is, okay, how many people, when do I get a break? How many people do I have to crucify today before lunch? Okay, yeah, just come on, guys. And he has, it was a essay on sin in one sense, because here is the sin that's committed, just absolutely not knowing what you're doing. Just, hey, hey, I'm busy here, And the other is Bob, who's got the hammer, he's got the nail set, his eyes go exactly where he's going to hit that thing, and he knows exactly what he's doing. And those were the those were the ideas that I hopefully carried into that.
Yeah. One last question about that, and then I'll let you go, Chris. People have looked at that sculpture. Well, I mean, thousands of people have seen it and just stopped. They're arrested by it. And I've heard people say, when I look at it, I see this in it or that in it. And then they always say, I'm seeing that in it. Did you intend that? And you have a great response to that.
Well, that's what I love. In fact, that's one of the things that's why I go in and talk in Tommy Gibbons' class, is you're talking about inspiration or whatever, and what you really meant. There was somebody said, why do you have Jesus's hands blessing the people crucifying him? And I go, I didn't do. Oh goodness, I did that. I worked incredibly hard getting the hands exactly the way I wanted them. Why did I want them that way? I liked it. And you realize, oh my goodness, he is blessing the people who are crucifying him. And that's it. Just because I did not mean to put it there does not mean that it's not there.
Yeah.
And the wonderful thing about doing religious art, as we could say, is the fact that there is, I used to say there's no bottom to how deep you can go, but somebody says you're wrong, there's no top. So there is just inherently in the subject matter so much that can be seen and added and the like. But one story I'm sure I told you, but my favorite is, if I've done nothing else in this life, the greatest compliment I ever had about my artwork was a former assistant was, before he ever knew me, was pretty drunk, cutting through the Fuller campus to go to his car. And he saw the sculpture and thought it was real.
Ooh.
And he thought somebody's getting beat up, and he was going to throw down and help the guy.
Really?
So, and you say, oh, you must be so flattered at the fact that he thought it was real and you're a good sculptor because it's real. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I hit him in a way that he wanted to help.
Oh.
I physically have proof that I've inspired somebody to do exactly what the sculpture should do, to want to be there, to help, to do the right thing.
There are a lot of stories about that sculpture, and I'll just finish with one more. And I've already told you this. There was a family that was walking across the Fuller campus, and among them was a little girl who had Down syndrome. She was about 5 years old. And as they're gathering around to admire the sculpture, the little girl is so taken with this, and she rushes up and she starts pulling on the arms of Bob, and she says, no, don't you do that to my dear Jesus. She just was totally involved in the life of the sculpture. Well, Chris, this has been fun, and maybe we'll get a chance to do it again sometime. We chat all the time, but we don't record it always, and this is
No.
fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for getting us started on this idea of lousy gods. Um, some people just have lousy gods. I think we'll talk more about that. In fact, we want to write a book about it one of these days, and we may just do that. And maybe these conversations will help. But Chris, you've been a real champ to help out with this and to have a fun conversation. And thanks very much.
Thank you so much. This was a marvelous thing.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.